I've eaten at least 3,500 pounds of beef since 2020, and I'm going to show you exactly what it did to my heart, my hormones, and my blood work. So I got over 100 biomarkers tested, so we're going to go over a ton of those, what looks good, what looks bad, if I should be worried, and what I'm going to do about some of those questionable results that I got. And all of this lab work was done through Levels Health, so huge thanks to Levels for sponsoring this video and making it possible for me to do this deep dive so I can show you exactly what's going on inside of my body after basically doing all the wrong things from the mainstream nutrition perspective. Okay, so to provide a little bit of context about my nutrition and lifestyle, right now I'm 38 years old. I'm going to be 39 in about a month and a half. I've been eating about 2 pounds of red meat every single day for about 5 years now. I also have about a dozen eggs each week. I eat a lot of butter. I have fruit, raw dairy, some cooked vegetables every now and then. And then I also have a decent amount of bone broth and collagen-based proteins. But there isn't really a single day that I don't eat beef. And conservatively, I probably actually go through about 1,100 to 1,400 beef patties each year. Also, I work out about 2 to 3 times a week. I get about six and a half hours of sleep each night, which is pretty horrible. I have 2 small kids. I run my own business, which means that stress is extremely high. So what do my labs have to say about all of this? Am I a healthy, almost 39-year-old? Now, out of the 104 different biomarkers, 82 were in range, 4 were out of range, and the other 18 biomarkers were from a urine sample and some nutrient profiles. And we're really only going to go over the ones that most people are going to be interested in. Also, none of this is medical advice. It's just my interpretation of my own lab. So let's go over what was in range first. So first up, we have my blood sugar and insulin sensitivity, because if these are off, then a lot of other biomarkers are going to look completely dysfunctional, but mine were actually looking pretty good. So my fasting glucose was 83 milligrams per deciliter. So the pre-diabetic cutoff is 100, but I would say that anything less than 90 is going to be ideal. My fasting insulin was at 2.8. Now, anything under 6 should be your target. So I'm doing pretty good here. Also, keep in mind that this is something that everyone should absolutely be testing. And I was really pleasantly surprised to see that this biomarker was part of the huge list that Levels provides. My hemoglobin A1C was 5.5. Now, this is basically just a reflection of your average blood sugar over the last 90 days. And you really want to try to have this number be below 5.7. So these are all pretty good. And it's pretty clear that my body is tolerating carbohydrates fairly well. And I'm not insulin resistant. And there's no sign of creeping metabolic dysfunction, which is really kind of starting to become much more common in men my age. And keep in mind that this is after eating tons of saturated fat, cholesterol, and 0 seed oils. And also right now, I'm also eating quite a bit of seasonal fruit, and I've been having some organic, unenriched white rice and potatoes every now and then too. Now, let's go over some of my cardiovascular markers. And this is where people expect things like carnivore or low carb or really high red meat diets to just kind of blow up. But it kind of didn't really happen. So my HDL was 80 milligrams per deciliter, which is pretty good. Anything over 60 is going to be cardioprotective. My triglycerides were at 62. So low triglycerides are going to be a strong marker of good fat metabolism and insulin sensitivity. Anything under 100 is going to be ideal. So 60 is pretty solid. Now, this also means that my triglyceride to HDL ratio is less than 2. It's actually 0.78, but these would further confirm that I'm pretty low risk for a cardiovascular event or disease. Now, my ApoB was 86 milligrams per deciliter, and this is one of the most important cardiovascular biomarkers since it reflects the total number of atherogenic particles, but anything under 90 is going to be considered optimal. Another overlooked cardiovascular risk marker is homocysteine. Mine came in at 9.4, which is okay, but I would actually like to see it be a little lower, but this would actually increase or spike a little bit more if I were missing B12, B6, or folate, which I'm definitely not. My LDL was 113. I do want to talk about this in a minute though, but though it does appear to be slightly elevated, I'm really not that worried about this at all. My non-HDL cholesterol was 127, and this is essentially just the LDL and other cholesterol carrying particles like VLDL. Now, this makes my total cholesterol 207, which is just outside of that reference range. And again, I'll touch on this with my higher LDL, but if we look at my LDL to HDL ratio, that is 1.4, and anything below 2 is going to be ideal. Now, my high sensitivity CRP, so my C-reactive protein, is less than 0.2, which is extremely low. And this basically means that there's very, very little inflammation in my body. And this becomes relevant because elevated levels of LDL without inflammation is 100% not the same as LDL with inflammation. So if you're just looking at total cholesterol and LDL, you're kind of missing the bigger picture because the rest of my heart health markers are looking pretty solid. And again, we're going to go over some of the other out of range biomarkers in detail in a little bit, but let's go over my hormone health right now. So again, I run a business. I have 2 kids. I don't have the best sleep. I don't get enough sleep. And I train only 2 to 3 days a week. So every time I get my hormones tested, I always just kind of wonder if my testosterone is going to tank, but it actually hasn't really. So my testosterone came back at 744, which is a pretty healthy number for a guy who's almost 39. But more importantly, my free testosterone, the testosterone that your body can actually use, is 125.5, which isn't really horrible. And then I think right now, the average testosterone for a 40-year-old man is going to be a little bit less. It's going to be about 350 to 475. So I think I'm doing okay compared to the average guy. And this kind of explains why I still feel, I don't know, pretty strong, have good energy, and recovered decently despite not getting enough sleep. But I do know that if I slept more, my energy would definitely be better, and I wouldn't be surprised if my testosterone levels went up too. Now, my SHBG is 49, and so SHBG is sex hormone binding globulin, and it binds to testosterone, which prevents testosterone from binding to androgen receptors. And mine are actually kind of on the upper end of normal at 49, which to me is a little bit concerning. But again, my free T levels are doing pretty good right now. So my estradiol, though, so my estrogen, is, I would say, also on the higher end of the normal range too. It's at 39. And I would imagine that this is coming from stress. I've also been recovering from a slight meniscus tear, and estrogen is also heavily involved in wound healing. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about my plan with estradiol and SHBG levels when I go over my basic plan to further optimize all of my biomarkers. But then also my DHEAS is 121. So DHEAS is a precursor hormone made by your adrenal glands, and it's critical for testosterone and estrogen production. But my level is actually kind of on the lower end of normal. The range is usually around 93 to 415. So this isn't bad, but it also could be a reflection of chronic stress or slightly diminished adrenal output, especially if it's being paired with higher life demands and also lack of sleep. So I'm not really terribly surprised about this, though, since, again, I'm under a lot of stress with literally everything in life, but this is definitely worth monitoring over time. So my luteinizing hormone and follicular stimulating hormone were both kind of in the middle of the healthy range. So my LH was at 3.3, my FSH was 4.8. And this is important because it's telling me that my brain is actually signaling to my body to produce testosterone. So nothing's really broken. There's no synthetic help, no TRT. My system's still working pretty naturally. And then lastly, for my hormones, my prolactin was at 6.5 nanograms per milliliter. So prolactin basically just regulates dopamine, and it can inhibit testosterone when elevated. And it's also often linked to increased levels of estrogen as well. Now, the reference range for prolactin is between 2 and 18, but I think as a guy, anything under 10 is going to be ideal. So I think I'm doing okay with this one. So there's no sign of prolactin induced testosterone suppression. And I still have a pretty healthy libido, pretty decent motivation despite lack of sleep. And I really do hope that my hormone markers stay like this. Obviously, I would like them to improve, but I do think that my hormones are looking fairly good for an almost 39-year-old guy who's eating a lot of meat, who's basically not eating any terrible, awful, shitty food too. So why don't we move on to my liver, kidney, thyroid, and also immune function. Now, these are the systems that would usually show stress if I was overdoing it with protein, fat, or just pushing my body too hard. And remember, I'm eating a lot of protein and fat. And I'm sure people would also think that my kidney health is probably questionable too because of the amount of protein that I'm eating. But before we go over that, why don't we see how my liver's doing? So my liver enzymes, ALT, AST, and GGT, all came back pretty solid. If 2 pounds of red meat a day were trashing my liver, we'd see some signs here, but these are pretty clean. There's not a lot of inflammation. There's no sign of fatty liver, nothing really even close to borderline. However, though these numbers do look good, I do worry about impaired phase 2 detoxification in my liver because my borderline high levels of estrogen. And again, I'm going to talk about this when we get to my plan for optimizing my health and my biomarkers. But next, we have my kidneys. And I know a lot of people love to say that high protein diets ruin your kidneys, but my labs don't really back that up at all. So my creatinine came in at 1.13, which is pretty normal, especially for someone with decent amount of muscle mass, and my EGFR, so that is my glomerular filtration rate, was 85, which is well above the 60 cutoff that they use to diagnose kidney issues. Levels also checked my uric acid, which people love to tie with red meat and gout, but mine was at 6.5, right in the middle of the range. If beef were wrecking my kidneys, this would be one of the first signs. So overall, there's basically no signs of protein overload, kidney strain, or liver damage, which are oddly common concerns with high protein or animal-based diets. Now, when it comes to my thyroid function, this test only looked at TSH, which I wish they did have a more robust thyroid panel, but my TSH came back at 1.36, which is fine. I wish it was a little bit closer to 1 though, but overall my TSH isn't very high, which is a good sign, and I'm not really sluggish, and I don't really look like I have any kind of impaired thyroid function. Now, when it comes to my immune markers, my white blood cell count was at 6.1, which is right in the middle of the range. Lymphocytes, neutrophils, monocytes, eosinophils all were in balance. That means my immune system isn't really underactive, it's not overreactive or terribly stressed. So overall, the big 4 systems, liver, kidneys, thyroid, immune, all look pretty clean on paper. So there's no signs of internal wear and tear, which honestly surprised me again, but given my stress and sleep habits. Now, another couple of things that I did want to go over was my vitamin D came back at 37, and I'm pretty disappointed in this one because I try to get a lot of sunlight pretty much as possible, even during the winter. And I was thinking that I would probably be maybe in the 40s at least, but I definitely like to bump this up to get over 50 as soon as possible. And I would pretty much just try to do this the old-fashioned way of getting more sunlight. And then my omega-6 to omega-3 ratio was 4.5 to 1, which is fine. I like to be a little bit lower, but I would say that it's a pretty decent win because most people who are consuming this Western diet are basically at 15 to 1 or a little bit higher, and that ratio is tied to inflammation, cellular damage, poor recovery. But I would like to see this number be a little bit less than 4 to 1, and I'm pretty close, but I would say that one of the biggest benefits of removing seed oils from my diet is definitely helping me get this ratio low compared to most people out there. Okay, so we've talked about what looks good, but what markers are actually out of range? What is looking bad, and what do I need to work on to improve my health? So the first thing that I want to talk about are my cholesterol numbers, specifically LDL and total cholesterol, because if you only listen to mainstream headlines, you'd think that I'm pretty much a walking heart attack. But here's why I'm literally not concerned at all. So my LDL and total cholesterol are both slightly elevated by conventional standards, but that's in the context of high HDL, low triglycerides, stable glucose, low inflammation markers, and a diet rich in nutrient-dense whole foods. So there's so much nuance to this, and I don't think cholesterol numbers should be focused on in isolation. It's really just the bigger metabolic picture that matters. Okay, future Tim here, I'm just butting in right now, but I'm sure you've been wondering this whole time, if your total cholesterol is 207 and your LDL cholesterol is at 113, what were they 5 years ago? So I was able to do some digging, and I found my biomarkers from 2020, February of 2020. And my total cholesterol was 204 and my LDL numbers were at 105. So that increase to 207 and 113 is pretty negligible to me over the course of 5 years, especially after having eaten about 2 pounds of meat, 2 pounds of beef every single day over that time period. So again, I really do think that we are really prioritizing LDL and total cholesterol numbers way too much, and we aren't really looking at the overall metabolic picture. And to support my argument for this, there are a couple of different studies that I want to reference that kind of challenge the cholesterol theory and should be a little bit eye-opening. So there was actually a huge population study from South Korea where they tracked almost 13 million people, and they found that the lowest all-cause mortality was in people with total cholesterol numbers between 210 and 249. There was another study that was done at a major health system in the United States with almost 180,000 people, and they concluded that the lowest risk of mortality appears to exist in the wide LDL-C range of 100 to 189 milligrams per deciliter, which is much higher than current recommendations. And then a lot of people will also say that eating as much saturated fat as I do would be a huge problem for my heart health. But there was a 20-25 minute analysis that recently came out that reviewed 13,000 plus people across randomized controlled trials. And they found that lowering saturated fat didn't reduce heart disease, heart attacks, or even death from any cause. So that's not a small detail. And that basically undermines the core logic of cut out saturated fat to lower LDL to live longer. So I don't think LDL is inherently dangerous. I think what matters the most is if your LDL particles are oxidized, damaged, and inflamed. And my diet prioritizes whole foods, minimal seed oils and processed foods, and also my metabolic health. So no, I'm not really worried about this at all because I'm not playing that surface level number game. I'm looking at the full context: metabolic health, inflammation, and actual outcomes, not just lab targets designed for big pharma profits. So another thing that I do want to talk about is lipoprotein little a, so LP little a. It's a highly atherogenic type of cholesterol, and over 90% of your LP little a level is basically genetically determined. So they say that there's not really a lot that can be done from a lifestyle intervention perspective. However, there actually are a few things that can directly and indirectly help me in my situation because my LP little a is slightly elevated. So what can I do to support my LP little a? So right now my HSCRP is pretty low. My homocysteine is also kind of like right in the middle of the reference range. I'm going to try to maintain high insulin sensitivity, low triglycerides, and essentially just overall good metabolic health markers. And then focus on nutrient dense diets, so animal based proteins, no processed foods, a lot of variability with micronutrients as well. Something that I really need to try to focus on is my exercise, my sleep, and how I can better manage my stress consistently. And then also one of the really interesting things about LP little a is that kind of paradoxically and also ironically, higher saturated fat diets can lower LP little a, especially compared to low fat, high carb diets. And this study right here showed that reducing saturated fat could actually increase LP little a. Now, the other thing too is that seed oils and polyunsaturated fats, this is going to be really important for LP little a too, because LP little a carries oxidized phospholipids, which are pro-inflammatory. So a high polyunsaturated fat diet, especially when consuming seed oils, is going to increase lipid peroxidation and can also worsen that oxidative burden. So I think what I'm doing right now is going to be pretty helpful when it comes to my LP little a status. And then lastly, for the out of range markers, my omega-3s appear to be a little bit too high. Now, we've been told that omega-3s are actually anti-inflammatory and good for the heart, but too much of a good thing, especially in the wrong context, can definitely backfire. So omega-3s like EPA and DHA are highly, highly unsaturated. So this means that they can actually oxidize really easily. So if your metabolism is sluggish, your antioxidant systems are depleted, or your tissues are already PUFA loaded from years of seed oil intake, piling on more omega-3s can actually increase oxidative stress and lipid peroxidation, though I would actually say that omega-3 metabolites are much less of an issue compared to linoleic acid metabolites. And then lastly, I did want to talk about my plan of action to get things dialed back in and optimize further without being a total robot weirdo like Brian Johnson. Seriously, no offense to that. I really mean that in the nicest possible way. But something that I do want to touch on from early in the video was that my testosterone came back fine. It was 744 total, 125 free. But here's the thing. My SHBG is 49. And right now I'm experiencing a little bit of burnout, and I do have cold hands and feet. And my body temperature when I wake up is maybe in like the low 97s. So that's basically telling me that my body is under a little bit of stress. But when it comes to SHBG and testosterone, remember SHBG binds to testosterone. So the higher that is, the less free T I'm going to be having in my tissues. And SHBG can often arise in response to estrogen, poor thyroid function, and stress hormones like cortisol. So right now my estradiol is on the high end of the normal range. My TSH is fine, but the reduced body temp and cold hands and feet are signals that my thyroid could be off. And then my cortisol is actually normal right now, but there's another thing that's actually kind of showing me that there are some kind of stresses going on in my life. So remember, my vitamin D is only at 37, despite getting pretty regular sun exposure. I do tan pretty easily, and I try to work outside as much as I can. And I'm also generally outside when the UV index is at its highest. And I pretty much go out every single day, or I try to. But that number is just too low for my liking. And that can actually mean that there's either an inflammation problem or potentially liver sluggishness, which could be impairing vitamin D metabolism and storage. So I'm actually thinking that it's more liver sluggishness. And the reason for this is because I'm not just looking at individual markers because my liver panel looked pretty good, but I'm just seeing an overall system that's under some sort of stress. So to me, estrogen isn't being cleared well. My vitamin D isn't converting well. SHBG is kind of on the high-ish end, and my body temp is low. So I think this could mean that there is some issue going on with detoxification in my liver, potentially converting T4 into T3. And I do actually have a history of alcohol consumption and a lot of processed food consumption. When I was a kid, I used to eat a lot of processed food. I started drinking when I was 15, but basically stopped when I was 30. A lot of partying back then. So I do feel that I did really put my liver through hell and back. So here is how I'm going to try to correct all of this starting now. And a lot of it is kind of already what I'm already doing. So first is I'm going to be prioritizing pro-metabolic animal-based foods. So I'm going to continue to have a lot of beef, 1 to 2 pounds a day. I'm going to have raw dairy. I'm going to drink bone broth. I'm going to have gelatin. I'm also going to have fruit, a little bit of cooked vegetables every now and then. And then I'm still going to try to increase my carbohydrate consumption, either with some type of cooked white rice or potato. And then I'll increase my carbs during the summer, which it is right now. And then also I want to have and continue to have 1 to 3 ounces of liver per week, just because it's extremely nutrient dense. I'm also going to try to have and be more deliberate about having the Ray Peat raw carrot salad, just because this can help with estrogen clearance and gut detoxification. I don't really eat a lot of omega-3s right now in general, and I don't recommend supplementing with omega-3s also, but I will probably not consume very many foods that are going to be high in omega-3 fatty acids. And also I'm going to be completely avoiding polyunsaturated fatty acids as much as possible, just to reduce any kind of oxidative burden. And then I'm also considering taking potentially calcium D glucarate to support phase 2 detoxification in my liver, or I could try eating some citrus peels, but I've never really tried to do that. And this would be to support estrogen clearance from my liver. Now, when it comes to lifestyle areas, I really need to focus on improving my circadian rhythm and biology. I can't really get a ton of light first thing in the morning just because I'm working, but I am really trying to prioritize late morning and midday sun. I'm going to keep my windows open. I keep my windows open when I drive my car. And then I'm going to try to keep my shirt off as much as possible without being a total weirdo. And then I think one of the most important things for me is just going to be to get more consistent and better sleep. So targeting anywhere between 7.5 to 8 hours. So 5 sleep cycles is going to be ideal. And then I really need to just stop waking up at 4:15, 4 to 5 days a week. If I can cut that down to 1 to 2, I think that could be really, really helpful. I'm going to continue to try to lift weights. If I can do that 3 days a week, that's going to be great. And then right now, I'm also not really having that many stimulants. I have coffee about 3 days a week, which is a big difference compared to what I was doing about 6 months ago. I was probably having about 7 to 9 cups of coffee. And I really cut back because I was getting really kind of stressed out every single day. And I was having a really hard time going to sleep at night. When it comes to supplementation, I'm going to be using some magnesium glycinate, some N-acetylcysteine, some taurine, and camu. And this is just kind of going to be the kind of foundation of my supplement stack. And this is really just to boost antioxidants, help me with my sleep, support digestion, and then also support liver detoxification too. And then I'm probably going to have some glycine as well to help support liver detoxification, help improve insulin sensitivity as well. Glycine is basically a miracle amino acid. So those are kind of the main supplements that I'm going to personally be focusing on. So after eating about 3,500 pounds of beef over the last 5 years, it's safe to say that I'm not dead. In fact, I would actually say that most of my biomarkers are looking pretty solid. There are a few things that do need attention, but now I know, and I'm putting together a pretty solid and robust plan. And all of this is really, really just great information that I got from Levels. And that's the real takeaway here, is that if you care about your health, don't guess. Go get your labs done. And I would highly, highly recommend going through Levels. Everything about the process was super simple, and it was just really great being able to see what's going on inside of my body in more than 100 different ways. So go check it out for yourself. I'll leave a link in the description down below where you can get 2 months free if you sign up for their annual membership. And then you'll also be able to test 28 different biomarkers with that membership. And then you can also decide to upgrade to the more robust 100 plus biomarker panel if you want. So thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know what you think of my labs in the comments down below, and I'll see you on the next one.